Good morning and welcome to Business Impacts in the first months of the Trump administration. This is brought to you by NJBIA, and we're just going to take a few seconds to allow people to get in from the waiting room. Thank you for your patience. We have quite a crowd today. Okay. Being respectful of everybody's time, we certainly want to get started on time. We'd like to thank everybody for being here and welcome to the Business Impacts in the first few months of the Trump administration, brought to you by NJBIA. My name's Wayne Staub, and I have the pleasure of being the Chief Business Relations Officer here at NJBIA. We created this program because job creators like you told us that you needed information like this. And this is just one of the many things business and job creators seek our help on. They also seek our help on assistance with HR issues, the cost of healthcare, running a 401k, payroll, training, and so much more. I'm going to put my name in the chat, and if anybody'd like to reach out to talk more about that, you can just reach right out to me. And we'd welcome the opportunity to tell you more about this. So I'd love to connect. Now let's get started with our program. So joining us today, we have Max Hyman, who's the policy director at the National Association of Manufacturers. And we also have the pleasure of having Doug Schoenberger, who's the government affairs specialist at New Jersey Center for Nonprofits. And of course, our very own, my colleague and friend, Chris Emmelholz, who is our chief government affairs officer here at NJBIA. During the session, if you have a question, you can put it in the chat or you can raise your hand. We are going to address the questions after each presentation, so be patient, and we do promise to get to all questions. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Chris. Chris, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Wayne, and good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here with you, and thank you again to BIA for hosting this, and to Max and Doug for, I know, the great perspective you're going to share with our audience. Just to set the stage for you, people wonder, why are we doing this? There's really nothing going on in DC. It's not like you're seeing anything on the news or your social media feeds. And at BIA, we focus on state legislature and state government and the executive branch. And we know that we're affiliated with NAM and their COSMA, Council of State Manufacturing Associations. They do a fantastic job in DC, but lately we've been getting more calls from our members, our New Jersey businesses, our New Jersey nonprofits about federal issues than we've ever remembered in our time doing advocacy in Trenton for all of you, our businesses in New Jersey. And so we thought it was appropriate to have this and to try to present some balance, to try to kind of, you know what, there's a lot to worry about potentially in the Trump administration. There's also a lot to be optimistic about in a Trump administration, what they're going to be doing for the next couple of years. And there's a lot of uncertainty. And to kind of get through that uncertainty, thought it'd be great to kind of bring together a few experts like we have from NAM and from the Center for Nonprofits, because we've heard from our nonprofits worrying about funding. We've also heard from our manufacturers concerned about trade issues. We also hear there's a lot of good things that might be coming in terms of tax changes and regulation issues and infrastructure and energy. So I think there's the good, there's the bad, there's the ugly and uncertainty. And so I think to try to get us through that, wanted to turn it over to Max from our National Association of Manufacturers. Again, I said BIA, we're a great partner. They're a great partner of ours. They do a fantastic job in Washington, D.C. advocating for manufacturing, which is critical to our economy. If it was not for the folks making things, we would not have the economy. We would not have all of the positives, the Jersey economy, the national economy, and NAM is the point person on all those things in D.C. So we thank you, Max, and we thank all the staff at NAM for that perspective. Max has a background throughout Washington, D.C., working on the Senate for a while from the Cato Institute. He handles transportation, infrastructure, supply chain, labor issues for NAM, and is the lobbyist for them on different regulatory legislative issues. So we look forward to hearing from him. Max, I turn it over to you. Max will talk for a little bit. We welcome any questions in the chat, and then we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A after Max talks. And then after that, we'll get to Doug and hear from some of the other federal funding concerns that we have. So thank you, Max.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks for the kind words. And I appreciate you all having me here this morning to speak with you on what's been going on here in DC. As Chris mentioned, my name is Max Hyman, the Director of Transportation, Infrastructure, and Labor Policy here at the National Association of Manufacturers. The NAM is, of course, the largest industrial trade association in the United States. We represent manufacturers in all 50 states across all sectors, thousands of members, really, and are one of the leading business voices on behalf of industry and business here in the United States Capitol. So I'm going to walk you, as Chris mentioned, I'm going to walk you through some of the, lay of the land, some of the top issues that we're facing here in Washington. These include tax, trade, regulatory developments, all areas in which we are heavily engaged to ensure manufacturers' priorities are heard. It's been a tumultuous few months with a lot of uncertainty for our member companies. Our most recent manufacturing survey, and some of you all may have seen it when it was released, it was a Q1, revealed growing concerns over trade and increased raw material costs. This is stemming from the actions that we've seen here in the early days of the administration. But we, continue to see areas of opportunity, and we're calling on the Trump administration and Congress to drive a comprehensive manufacturing strategy. Talking about taking the good, good with the bad, trying to find pathways forward. This includes extending the 2017 tax reform provisions, regulatory certainty, permitting reform, energy dominance, strengthening the manufacturing workforce, and advancing a common sense trade policy. Together, these things, these pillars, can form the foundation for sustained growth and competitiveness for manufacturers in the United States. First, I'll take tax. Obviously, I think from an NAM perspective and, for business community writ large, obviously one of just, the huge issues out there, during this Congress in the early days of the administration. This year has been called Taxmageddon, by a lot of folks due to the expiration of several provisions from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act passed in 2017. In addition to those provisions that have been, phasing out already, R&D, full expensing, interest deductibility, more set to expire at the end of this year. We've been at the forefront of this issue, way before this, though. In addition to advocating for those provisions I just mentioned, in June we launched our Manufacturing Wins campaign to educate Congress and the administration on the need to preserve the 2017 tax reform. And in January, we released a long-awaited study showing, and I'll make sure I get this right, 6 million jobs, 540 billion in wages, and 1.1 trillion in U.S. GDP are at risk if Congress fails to renew the 2017 tax cuts. And it shows that the manufacturing community will bear the brunt of a lot of these increases and impacts. When we launched this study, we were, it was back in January, if I'm not mistaken. We were very fortunate to have members of, House leadership with us and the chairs of the Senate Finance and House Ways and Means Committee, two folks that don't often get in a room together, and we were able to bring them together at this event. The key players, as most of you will likely know, this effort will need to pass via Congress via budget reconciliation. I can get into the parliamentary procedure of that to a certain extent. I was there in the Senate when we had some of these other reconciliation or other efforts pass via budget reconciliation. But basically, this requires the Senate and the House to pass identical budget resolutions that will then unlock the process to put together a bill. As of right now, the Senate and the House have both passed very different budgets, and they're going to have to come to an agreement on these top line numbers and the scope before proceeding to then pass an identical resolution. I think it was recently said, just as yesterday, and I believe this is from House leadership, they need the playbook. Like they're still just talking about the playbook before they can actually call the plays and then run the plays. So we're still in some of the early days here, but we're going to continue to drive home the need for renewal of these expiring provisions that are integral to manufacturers and to businesses in the United States. While all of this is going on, President Trump and the administration have been moving at a breakneck pace, to put it mildly, to affect policy via executive action. And front and center in this is trade. On day one, President Trump issued a memorandum directing several departments to review trade practices and recommend actions to establish what he termed an America First trade policy. Uh, we've since deviated from this plan somewhat, but we still expect the required reports under the memo to be issued by April 1 with action on trade reciprocity and other things possible as soon as the following day, April 2nd. In the interim, we've seen a flurry of activity. This includes 20% tariffs on China, and this is on top of previous tariffs and Section 301 remedies actions. We've seen on again, off again tariffs on Canada and Mexico. Most recently, I think just this, of course, the news breaking yesterday, and then it was off based on the Premier Ford's, decisions. We've seen 25% steel and aluminum and derivatives tariffs across the board. And just today, we're seeing that retaliatory action announced from the European Union on up to I believe 26 billion euros worth of goods, which I think is around like what 28.3 or so billion US dollars. Um, Throughout all of this, the NAM has strived to highlight the importance of trade to manufacturers and to find a thoughtful, common sense pathway to effectuate trade policy that, number one, provides certainty and allows folks to have certainty in their investments. These are long-term investments that the manufacturers are making, and also that supports domestic manufacturing. Um, Enactment of that comprehensive manufacturing strategy that I mentioned, which includes tax reform and regulatory reform, is key, to this effort and to ensure that manufacturers are and businesses are able to continue to remain competitive as we pursue some of these trade policies. Talking about some of the things that really have given us a cause for optimism, part of that strategy on the regulatory side. The administration has also been pursuing since day one a deregulatory agenda that holds a lot of promise for the manufacturing community. We've been involved in this discussion for years, going back, through the Biden administration and beyond, talking about the need for sensible regulations. In fact, we have a Manufacturers for Sensible Regulations Coalition, which we lead, and which sent there are a number of allied trades and others that are involved in this coalition. And we sent a letter to the incoming administration in December outlining those regulations and efforts that we believe ought to be reconsidered in order to in order to enhance manufacturing competitiveness. This includes everything from, of course, corporate finance to labor to environment to energy. Just runs the gamut. On day one, right out of the gate, from the administration, we saw the regulatory freeze on, pending executive actions, or the declaration of a national energy emergency intended to unlock, authorities for to be used, in everything from Clean Water Act permits, the like, to speed up permitting of energy projects and otherwise. And most recently, we we also we have I shouldn't say most recently, following that, we had the announcement of the executive order announcing a 10-to-1, regular new rules, that for every new rule to send 10. Certainly an ambitious goal. And just recently had an announcement or an executive order directing the agencies to take a hard look at those actions that will underpin the promulgation of the first unified regulatory agenda. Really, kind of like the agency's big bite at the apple to announce what are there going to be their regulatory priorities. Here in the first year of the administration, and we are actively engaged in that effort. We are going to make sure that we are providing these agencies with the first of all, just the rules that they ought to consider, to reconsider the regulatory actions they ought to pursue, and but also providing them, underpinning those recommendations with data and with examples, to drive home a regulatory agenda. With that, just in closing, I'll say, it's been an interesting time, but we here at the NAM are certainly striving, as best as we can to ensure manufacturers and business has a seat at the table, to effectuate common sense policy, and to ensure that over the next few years that we continue to create an environment where our members and business across America can succeed. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and look forward to chatting with y'all. Thanks.
Thank you, Max. That was great. While people maybe populate the chat or raise their hands, wanted to ask a question because obviously NJBIA's job is to advocate for businesses, manufacturers, nonprofits in the State House, and you're doing the same in Washington, D.C. One thing that I've been struck with in conversations I've had with legislators here in the state, and be curious if you've seen other states kind of go one way or the other, is you can kind of see a Trump administration and you have a state that's a little more left-leaning than the Trump administration. And does that lead to state policy that goes and doubles down on, okay, we were progressive in this labor regulation or this environmental regulation or this other area of taxation, and we see the feds going in one direction, we're going to go the opposite? Or have you seen some states that, okay, well, obviously the affordability, smaller governments, whatever mantra President Trump won on in November, let's maybe embrace some of those? And have you seen some states kind of calming down some of the maybe left-leaning policies when it comes to labor or taxation? Any thoughts on that, or anything you've seen from NAM's perspective?
So just speaking, from my experience, no matter, whichever administration is, if it's a Democratic administration or Republican administration, I think you see kind of a renewal of like federalism, like fervor in the states that are of the opposite party. And you see, a renewed interest in, state action to effectuate, their preferred policy outcomes. And I think it's a case by case basis, both the individual state, but also in the policy area. For instance, California, and one of the areas in which I, work heavily, transportation and environment, has chosen to maybe hold off on some of those regulatory actions that would require approval under the Clean Air Act. It requires, they have to get an exemption under the Clean Air Act from the EPA, because they don't want to put those actions up for, to be shot down by the administration. So again, I think it's a case, but then you have announcements from other states that they're going to pursue this or that policy action to counter what the administration is trying to do, and we've seen that again in the environmental space in particular.
Thank you, Max. Wayne, you had your hand up.
First, there is a question that I just saw, that I thought I saw in the chat, that said, no, I don't see it. So two things, 2 points. Number one, how does the continuing budget resolution, which expires on Friday, how's that impact any of this? Do we think it's going to get signed? How does it impact moving forward?
Well, the continuing resolution being passed out of the House was huge, because you had folks who have not, members of the House Republican Conference who do not vote for continuing resolutions deciding to support this thing. And I think that that's a credit to, the president weighing in with them to, to advance the ball here. And like, quite frankly, it puts, the onus now on, the Senate and particularly members of the Senate Democratic Caucus to make decisions to what they're gonna do. I do not tend to put betting odds on funding fights here in DC
Right.
anymore. But just to say that like that was a huge I think development by the House that they were able to pass that, and certainly puts the onus across the Capitol now to see what they're gonna do.
And I wasn't crazy. There is one in the chat, and it kind of ties to this. What are you hearing about federal funding?
Yeah, and I think a lot of those things probably will get to where Doug is going to talk
Doug.
about more of those issues. And I know Diane in the chat, not sure if you are coming from the not-prop perspective or other perspective on federal funding, but yeah, hopefully Doug can get to that. And obviously that continuing resolution and that saga about Friday will certainly play into the funding that will or won't happen in DC. Max, wanted to dive a little deeper into tariffs because it's been one of the more common questions that BIA has gotten from legislators. We were invited to testify to the legislature back in December on what we thought about tariffs, and common question we get from the press in New Jersey to better understand it. A lot of people don't understand what they are. I think, thank you for your work on tariffs and bringing them up. There's a lot of reason to worry about them. And I think free trade is undoubtedly a good thing for the economy, a good thing for the New Jersey economy that's so heavily focused on logistics and manufacturing. And it's anything that restricts free trade is going to be a problem. Do you see the issues that it could lead to broad inflation? Do you see that it creates supply chain issues for manufacturers that need products from abroad? Do you see the impact on logistics industry? Like, what is NAM most worried about being the really detrimental impact of tariffs that will really hurt our economy and potentially lead to worse problems?
Yeah, first stipulate we have an amazing international team here at the NAM, led by Andrea Durkin, who is former USTR, has been involved in the trade space just for years, has such an impressive resume. And I would offer, to folks that if there are, kind of specific questions following on to this, particularly from, any of those who are NAM members as well, I'm happy to, work with the designated membership person to hear what your specific concerns are. I think it's the uncertainty, and it's the supply chain, disruption as a result of these actions. I'm not an economist, so I won't kind of get into, guesstimating on the general price level and what, the inflationary impacts would be. But I think on a day to day, what our members are coming to us, about, what their concerns are is in regards to like the just disruptions to their supply chain. Just this past week, I've been dealing a lot with the proposed 301 actions on Chinese vessels, and just what that is going to do to folks. Like just just per, disruptions to this transportation supply chain per se, but then also what does that do to your transportation costs, just to move things from point A to point B, and how it's going to be effectuated, particularly as some of those export restrictions start to kick in, where it has to be on U.S. build, U.S. flagged vessels. It's there's a lot of ins and outs, and we're how we've chosen to approach that and a lot of these issues is to just point out, the facts of what these various actions are going to portend, and communicate those to decision makers.
Thank you, Max. And Diane in the chat did clarify our question, so thank you very much, Diane. She actually, and I guess more to your wheelhouse
Yeah.
of federal funding for infrastructure.
Mhm.
Obviously, New Jersey is very interested in gateway funding, but just general transportation infrastructure across the board is important. And I know previous administration did some great work on bipartisan infrastructure law, and we hope some of that continues. So anything you're hearing on federal funding for infrastructure issues would be very appreciated by this audience.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'll just mention we are starting up our efforts on infrastructure legislation reauthorization, particularly focused right now on surface transportation, because that's probably going to be the first out of the gate as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act expiration approaches. September 30th, 2026, I believe, is when a lot of those programs are set to expire. And we're working, intently with the committees in both the House and the Senate as they gear up for reauthorization. And I would encourage folks here to work with their, individual congressional representatives with NGBIA and with the other with interested trades on on what they would like to see in any legislation. Yeah, I think it's still kind of a confused situation. I think there's maybe a little bit more clarity on the formula side, where a lot of these infrastructure dollars are just doled out to the state DOTs like via formula. I know the gateway and some of these other things are kind of a different issue, but I think you saw from members, probably heard from their state DOTs about the impacts that this could have, and we're quick to kind of get in the ear of the DOT and communicate that. On the discretionary side, you're gonna see I think a continued insistence from the administration on rejiggering, orienting dollars that they see as going towards climate related and green related spending priorities towards other means. I think there's just going to be a general preference in this administration for hard traditional infrastructure as opposed to some of the things that maybe we saw in the IIJA. That doesn't provide a lot of clarity, I know, but I think it's it's still a moving target. But those instances where like the states or maybe the administrators or the recipients of the funding, you'll probably see a little bit more clarity than some of those that are going to perhaps, and I'll let Doug can speak to this, maybe into like the nonprofit sector or to municipalities or the like.
Thank you, Max.
There is another question, Chris. Kim has put in there, what's the bit about US ships? If you could just touch on that a little more.
Sure, happy to. So there was an announcement, a couple weeks ago on proposed actions under this was section so this would have been section 301 of the Trade Act in regards to US or in regards to Chinese vessels. This follows on a process that was begun under the Biden administration as a result of petitions by I believe organized labor groups pointing out the perhaps unfair advantages that China has in the ocean-going shipbuilding industry, and as a result of subsidization and other unfair practices. The action proposed by the administration pursuant to that process is that you could have every time, say, a Chinese-built vessel calls at a U.S. port, it would be subject to anywhere from like 1 million. I think the range is about like depending on the source, about $1 to like $3 million, and that's based on both the vessel itself being Chinese built, but if that vessel is within a fleet that includes Chinese vessels, so even if the vessel itself is not Chinese built, but it's part of a fleet that includes Chinese vessels, then it would be hit with a fee. And then tacking on and then over the coming years, there would be export restrictions for a certain percentage of U.S. exports would have to be on first U.S. flagged vessels. So those vessels that may not be built here, but that were brought under the U.S. flag. And then after that, a certain percentage would have to be actually on U.S. built vessels. And suffice to say, we don't have a lot of shipbuilding capacity in this country anymore. And I think that it's part of it. It's a chicken and egg issue. And that's what, the administration is trying to perhaps remedy. Again, these are just proposed, and we're engaged in this to as they, look to promulgate a final action. But it could be, obviously problematic for those reasons. But understand what they're trying to do in terms of enhancing domestic manufacturing of, U.S. and U.S. shipbuilding.
Thank you, Max. Question I got from a BIA member in your labor area is, I know there was some concern in New Jersey, and New Jersey has a similar state level bill on heat stress in the workplace. And I think OSHA was moving forward, and gets back to the federalism issue I brought up earlier. OSHA was moving forward on something that New Jersey was using as an excuse. Hey, let's not do a state bill that goes even further. Let's see what OSHA does. And then we heard OSHA, those rules may be paused on heat stress. That's something that NAM was following. I would imagine from hearing from New Jersey companies, manufacturing, warehouses, logistics, but also folks that are doing outside work at restaurants, that sort of thing, all been impacted could be impacted by this heat stress rule. What do you hear on that?
Yeah, in regards to the federal rule,
the
proposed rule. So yes, we did comment, and it's still something that's probably been caught up in this like regulatory, freeze reconsideration. Of course, the Department of Labor, the secretary was just confirmed and ensconced. I believe the deputy secretary, Mr. Sonderling, is up for a vote this week, and they've just now nominated they've nominated, and the nominee for OSHA, Mr. Keeling, his paperwork just got sorted out, and I think he's going to start going through the process. So I think as they're kind of like getting this team together, we'll get a little bit more clarity as to like what that's going to look like. I think there is interest, and I don't want to speak for the administration, but just, interest across the business community about getting to some type of, standard here. But what was proposed, at least from our view, missed the mark there. So we're gonna, if that's the tact that, the administration chooses to go in, then we're gonna, and as part of this kind of unified regulatory agenda, promulgation that we're going to be engaged in, we're going to highlight that and just say, look, you need to reconsider some of the things that the former administration was trying to do in that rule, and offer a little bit more flexibility and just take into account geographic differences.
So to make sure we get to Doug, there is one more question, and then we want to make sure we have enough time for Doug. And you could continue to put your questions that will hopefully, if we don't answer, we'll get to at the end. But the last one for you right now, Max, is, are there any concern among NAM members pertaining to Trump's administration goal of limiting/eliminating H-1B1 visas?
So immigration is very far from my wheelhouse, and I don't want to dodge here. I would need to confer with some of my colleagues on the specifics of that. I think overall are saying that the president is right to make the border a priority. Control of the border is a national security imperative. However, we must ensure that we have the workforce to continue to remain competitive and innovative. I'm happy to get back with Chris on some specifics there and in response to your question, Michael.
Yeah, no, thank you, Max. I apologize. I know immigration was not one of your issues, even though you covered a lot, and I can't imagine how you stay up to speed with everything going on and all those different issue areas you did cover well. But yeah, immigration, Michael, that is a good question. Important. Obviously, it's been a focus of the first few months of the Trump administration in many ways. And I think BIA would agree with what Max had to say. I think going a little further, BIA, similar to how is it free trade is undoubtedly good for the economy. Immigration is important for our economy, important for our workforce, important for other things like whether it's folks here on visas that are doing R&D in some of our pharmaceutical companies in New Jersey, or it's the folks here on visas that are working at the shore, staffing the Coors ice cream at the boardwalk or whatever it might be. Immigration is important, and there's that kind of immigration, but there's also, as Michael said, as Max said very well, that we want to make sure our country's protected, make sure that things like illegal drugs are not coming into the country in ways that we can better control. So I think finding that balance is important. We hope that balance protects the H-1B visas that are needed in this country, needed in the workforce. And the first Trump administration, I know BIA worked with some of our whether it's the shore chambers of commerce to try to advocate for those folks on visas working in the shore economy, service economies, or working with our pharmaceutical R&D folks, innovation folks, try to make sure we're getting that pipeline of people doing the R&D. Those are important. So I think BIA was prepared to do that again. I think from what I've heard, I think there's continue to be uncertainty. It's probably the big word for the day, a lot of uncertainty about exactly what's going to happen. In New Jersey, we've seen some headlines on some ICE raids. But getting to your H-1B1 visa question, I think there's probably a lot of uncertainty around that. But is there a chilling effect that happens when you see crackdowns on other immigration, on some of the legal immigration that is important to our economy? I don't know. And again, that's uncertain.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Max. Very, very helpful. A lot to think about. Good luck with the next 50 days, seeing what happened with this first 50 days. And I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't mention the fact that New Jersey supports, or NJBIA, we support our manufacturers in so many ways. And we are doing the coolest thing made in New Jersey competition. And it's manufacturingcounts.org. And anybody can go on and nominate anything that's made here in New Jersey. And we have probably over 50 nominations already, and we're hoping to get some more. With that said, our great president and our great GA team has been the leader, the charge, talking about affordability in New Jersey and how it impacts the job creators in the nonprofit world. And our president, Michelle, has always said that the nonprofits fill the void that the government could never fill when it comes to social programs and social impact. So there's a lot of concern, interest, and a lot happening at the federal level in this area. So it's my honor to introduce Doug Schoenberger, who I've had the pleasure of knowing for over 10 years. I admired him when he worked at AT&T, and I admire him even more now with his work at the Center for Nonprofits. Turn it over to you, Doug.
Thank you, Wayne. I probably should just stop. Start taking questions, but thanks very much. And thank you to BIA as well, who indeed have been great champions for the sector, both through their members and in supporting our work here at the New Jersey Center for Nonprofits. Really appreciate these few minutes just to talk a little bit about our world at the moment. Just to level set real quick, this is a thinly veiled plug, but the New Jersey Center for Nonprofits is just what you think it is. We're the organization that supports the 501c3 groups here in the state. We'd like to think we do all the things we probably should be doing to do that, do advocacy, which is where my focus is on, a lot of education, offer a lot of member benefits. Our members are C3s. We also have associate members, though, who are for-profit friends who often are involved with the nonprofit sector in one way or the other. So we've been around for 40 years. And again, in a nutshell, our job is to make our 501c3 sector's jobs easier. Might be bigger than you think here in New Jersey. 41,000 501c3s. Okay, that's a lot. About 340,000 employees. Just a little south of 10% of the state's private workforce. So we're bigger than construction, transportation, utilities, insurance. Okay, so pretty big. $56 billion in expenditures annually, and about 2 million volunteers providing about $3.5 billion of value in service. So one of my pitches here, working in the for-profit sector for a long time, is that we advocate, we are small businesses, right? There's a lot of us, but we're small. About a little less than 90% of the sector has less than $1 million in budget. So small in size, but in mass quite a bit. So we say we both impact and are impacted by the economic conditions here in New Jersey. Uh, we do an annual survey as well. In fact, it just came out last week. And as I set up the environment into which the recent federal activity plays into, survey, and we ask our members a lot of questions, a lot of the sectors. And I'm going to give you just a couple of numbers, but this is something our survey says pretty much every year. Increased demand for services outpaces funding. So 77% of our respondents said demand increased in 2024, but only about half of them said funding increased. So while we are small businesses, there is a difference in that for on the for-profit side, increased demand, not always, but almost always is linked with increased revenue or funding. That generally goes together. That is not generally the case on the nonprofit side. Sometimes it is a state grant to give money, and we'll talk about state grants at the end, but that linkage is not a given. And so that gap that we see every year continues to build and build and puts a lot of pressure on the structure of providing those services. The 2025 predictions are even worse. 76% say demand's going to increase, but only 35% say that funding will increase. So you can see that gap getting more and more pronounced as our members try to provide these services. So that's something we see every year. That big drop for predicting in 2025 is certainly related to what's been happening in Washington these days. We also are facing workforce shortages, as many are. About 40% of folks said they have multiple and a significantly higher percentage of positions open at the moment. So that's an issue as well. And as we segue, please know about 2/3 of our respondents get federal grants. Okay. So again, that's where that gap gets linked with demand. More demand, you think more funding. The government is certainly a big part of that as well. So to talk about the executive action, we've called it a lot of things. That's happened in these first few days. And I don't think it's a stunner that there was a lot of executive orders put out very quickly, right? I think anyone paying attention to what was said um, uh, in the run-up before the election would probably have a good sense that there was going to be some things done. I think what was surprising was, especially from the nonprofit side, is how broad the executive orders were that impact the nonprofits, how deep they were as well, and frankly, how vague they were. Okay. And that provides, and here's the word, right? Provides a ton of uncertainty. So this number's probably changed since we've been on the Zoom, but there's over 80 executive orders in this space, proclamations, memoranda. We're probably well over 100 at this point, and they cover a lot of issues, and you've probably seen them. But DEI, federal government issues, LGBTQ plus, the environment, even the census, houses of worship, very broad, and they impact the sector directly. The one that got things rolling, of course, was the OMB freeze. So that one came out right away and froze all OMB funding. So the pattern there is one that we've seen in a lot of the other orders as well. Order comes out, there's a lawsuit filed. The National Council of Nonprofits, it's just what you think, sort of our umbrella organization at the federal level, do amazing work. They were the lead plaintiff on getting that freeze undone. Long story short, but the courts have been a bit of an effective backstop for us on this throughout. So that has to do with temporary restraining orders, moving to preliminary injunctions. And so that freeze model is one we've seen, and that's what happened on the freeze. TRO in two different jurisdictions, preliminary injunctions, basically saying that freeze has to stop. Now, as we talk to our members about this, it's a bit of a mixed bag. Certainly, there's more funding flowing than there was 2 days after the freeze or a day or three after the freeze, but it's not all there. And, you know, percentages are hard, but maybe 70 or 80% of the folks we talk to say, yes, I'm starting to get money back again. But if you're in the 20%, those percentages don't mean anything. Right. I mean, it is existential that those funds keep coming. And so that's what we're seeing. And in our survey, you know, the quotes are pretty jarring, right? Just give you a couple quick ones. It was terrifying. It was a payroll week. We were afraid that we would not be able to pay contractors for work they had already done. we had to let go two brand new staff members. The future of our organization feels deeply uncertain. Hispanic clients are afraid to seek help with any community organizations. People are on the edge, and I've had people call me and say, Doug, I have 30 days and then we're done. So the process has been, as I said, the legal actions have to do with it's almost one-to-one, right? These orders come out, there's a legal challenge, and there's legal challenges to the legal challenges, of course, right? But the funding freeze was a good example of how that is working, and it's helping, and it's helping. Um, so that's been the model so far. And again, the courts have been a pretty good backstop. I appreciated that question about different types of states. In New Jersey, our administration has been very helpful. The AG has been very, very active on this, joining some of these lawsuits. We've sat with them and talked about some of these issues as well. They've been good. But again, there's only so much that they can do. So we're gonna continue to work with them on that. So what are we telling our nonprofits to do? Nothing too magic here, but look for alternative revenues. Now, there's a bit of a double whammy here because that gap I talked about, there's state grants, there's federal grants, but there's also philanthropy, there's donations. The problem on the philanthropic side is they don't know either, right? And there's a lot more demand coming into them as the federal issues, the state budget issues, they're getting a lot more demand as well. They're not quite sure what's going to happen here as well. So we've seen some of that philanthropic activity slow down a little bit too, with no malice, but just, hey, they are as uncertain as the rest of us. Economic uncertainty in general doesn't help individual donations, which can be a big part of some of our members' revenue stack. Look for more volunteers, more advocacy, and we're very happy to see that. I spend a lot of time convincing and cheerleading our members to advocate and to lobby. There is this image out there that nonprofits can't lobby. That's wrong. We have an 80 slide deck I could jump into on why that's wrong and how important it is that the sector be active in advocacy and lobbying. And we're built to advocate. We are passionate about what we do, and we have really good stories about whom we're serving and how we're serving. So we're really pushing folks to get out, make phone calls, meet your electeds, go talk to your mayor, call the front office. That's a big part of this as well. More collaboration, pooling resources between nonprofits. We've seen more of that happen. And one thing that we are pushing a lot is focus on mental health, wellness, and self-care, right? Care for the caregiver. This is very, very stressful times, as you might imagine, and just trying to keep people as strong as they can. And it gets to a different level pretty quickly. Had discussions with folks who have been working on equity issues for immigrants for years, and they have to make the decision, do we scrub our website to make sure that we have a chance at some funding later on? And I had one member look at me and say, what do I tell my kids when I say, you know what, we had to take it? That's hard. That's very hard stuff, right? So we're in a period of grace as well as we try to cheerlead our folks through this. So just want to close with one state issue, which does segue. So the thought's becoming, well, if you're not going to give us money, and I'm looking at New Jersey for right now, if you're not going to give us money, then at least give it to us better. So we have a couple of bills that we're working on, and thanks to Chris and BIA for helping on this first one directly. It is, and again, I work for some big bureaucracies, right? AT&T and Verizon, I kind of know how that goes. I'm fairly comfortable in it, to be honest, but trying to get a state grant is 2.5 times worse, right? It's really, really hard. And we hear it from all our members. We hear it from nonprofits all around the country. So we have a package of bills that are actually starting to move that would change that process somewhat dramatically for our members to find out about, apply for, get paid for, report on grants. The over-under number is like 9 months. If one of our members gets paid within 9 months of starting services after an enacted contract, they count that as a win, right? So what happens is the nonprofits basically float the state money on that. Reporting requirements, no indirect costs in these contracts. There's a lot of things going there. So just want to highlight a little bit of something that we're doing at the state level to try to come at this a little bit differently as well, to just help the funding and help the funding be done more efficiently. So that's where we are. There is going to be more to come. It is very, very difficult. It's difficult for everybody. We get that. But again, given that funding stream and the importance of it to our members, it's may you live in interesting times. So I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions.
Well, Doug, thank you for the lob you just threw to us, because NJBIA is hosting a webinar by Chris and the GA team on lobbying 101 for business leaders. So, we're seeing more and more small businesses, nonprofits get engaged because of the impacts that everything has on their business.
Yeah.
So we can send that link to you, and you can share it with
Awesome.
with your members.
Yep, I saw that. Thank you. That'd be great.
We do have a question. I'm sorry. Your numbers in regards to the nonprofits, does that include the nonprofit healthcare systems?
Yeah, it does. That's Elizabeth. Thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah, our numbers typically do, and they're a big part of that. There's a little skewing on there, but they are included in there. Yep.
Yeah, I would imagine health and higher ed would
Yes.
be our significant nonprofit employers in the state.
Yep.
And
Correct.
there was recently a legislative joint hearing with the Assembly Higher Ed and Senate Higher Ed committees came together to talk about funding issues. And I think we've all seen some national stories about some funding cuts and layoffs at higher ed institutions, and because of the uncertainty in DC. So very similar to everything that Doug talked about. And even those large employers are not necessarily not without worry for what's going on in DC, because our federal government has long been a supporter of a lot of the great work that happens in nonprofits doing lots of things. And so the concern that might change is definitely very real. Any other questions for Doug? Any questions in general, getting back to anything that was brought up today or anything that you're seeing in the news about what's going on in Washington, D.C. that BIA could potentially help with, or we can find out an answer from our friends at Center for Nonprofits or NAM or anybody else that might be an expert on a question you might have regarding federal concerns.
Chris, just one, I guess, for Max, and that has to do with the infrastructure money. So projects that were approved previously, will their funding be impacted? And if so, do you know how? Like we mentioned, Chris mentioned the Gateway project, right? That's big to us and New York. Do you see impacts on funding in those issues?
It's kind of it's a big question. Because when you say approved, I don't know how the administration is viewing its obligations here. Going back to the formula funding, we saw an issue where, I mean, this is contract authority, where basically, it's like you get your allotment, the appropriations committee says, okay, here's your obligation amount, here's what you're able to spend pursuant to the formula, and DOTs draw down they do they work with they contract the projects out, and then they go to the feds for reimbursement, and that was being held up in this morass. So I think a lot of these questions are just kind of still getting worked out, and in some instances we may see the administration test the bounds of like what has been of precedent here as to like how they're going to redirect some of these funds. And I think we're already seeing some of this where there's legal action being taken or considered in response to this. So like I'm specific to Gateway in particular, like I would have to look more into the specifics, but I think it's again still a very kind of confused and evolving situation.
And if no one else, I do have one for Doug. Again, it ties into, the healthcare systems. Medicaid reimbursement rates are an issue before the new administration came in here in New Jersey. And now I'm sure there's a lot of concern in regards to that. Can you just touch a little base on that, Doug?
Yeah, certainly a concern. I think it tends to, when it's a concern, it's a big concern, right? Not everyone is in that space, in the nonprofit side. But yeah, it's out there, but it's huge, but it's unfortunate. It's almost not top of the list right now because, gee, my portal's still closed, right? And I haven't gotten any funding for anything yet. So that does speak a little bit to sort of the magnitude of the problem. Haven't heard too much about that actually. But again, the numbers are huge, right? Don't need to tell you all, right? The numbers are huge. And Wayne, I will just want to add. There's some tremendous resources out there on all the executive orders, their status, and the legal part of that. Our website has a section that links to a lot of those, including the National Council of Nonprofits has a super good summary of the EOs. They update it every day. So if you want to take a look, probably the quickest way is to go to our site and then go to theirs. So if you're interested in the day-to-day and the blow-by-blows, as they say, there's a lot of good stuff out there.
Doug, quick commercial. What's that website?
njnonprofits.org.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, and maybe just to close out, unless there are any other questions, and I will certainly pause if I see anything pop up. But thank you very much to Max and NAM, and thank you very much to Doug and the Center for Nonprofits. And BIA will continue to advocate for you. And on these issues, we have shared a lot of what we've heard from Doug and Max to our congressional representatives. Again, BIA usually focuses on the 120 elected representatives in our state legislature, but we know that with a new administration and things changing every single day in DC, we've been reaching out to our congressional representatives in New Jersey and had some positive meetings with them, really pushing on the renewal of TCJ and how important that is, making sure they understand the concerns about tariffs, the concerns about federal funding freezes and any changes there. Even talking to them about have frank conversation about SALT. And I know this is less of a business issue that your employers are worried about and more a personal issue for all of our pocketbooks and it's tax season now. So we're all getting into that. That SALT change a couple of years ago did impact New Jersey quite a bit. And is that on the table to change that? And that could be something that helps us, but we're very worried if that is on the table to help us personally, but could they pay for that by doing something that hurts businesses? And maybe taking away that SALT exemption in some way, only doing it for personal individual taxes. So we're talking to our congressional representatives about that, about the good things that we want to make sure are renewed in TCJA, and some of the things that TCJA did that aren't as pro-business, and we'd love to see adjusted in this renewal. So been very productive group of meetings. If any of you have questions, any of you have questions about what we talked about today, or things that you'd love me to add to our federal lobbying as we reach out, or things that our state could be doing to assist all of you with the changes in Washington, D.C., please reach out. I threw my cell phone and my email address into the chat. We want to be there of assistance to all NJBA members for anything that you might be struggling with. So please reach out, and me and my government affairs team are happy to be of assistance on anything that's come up today or anything that might impact your business.
All right, Chris, two quick ones. Number one, Barbara, yes, everybody who signed up will be getting a recording of this event. Thank you, Barbara. And then there was one more question real quick. And
Yep.
Is government funding for nonprofits more focused on programs or capital projects?
Yeah.
What advice would you give to a nonprofit that is seeking government funding for capital projects? Doug?
Yeah, Meg, thanks for that. Majority of it is absolutely program based. There is some capital. This is a bit of a nerve. So when I was the funder for Verizon's foundation in the state, we wouldn't do any capital, right? We only did programs because we needed things that we had to count, right? Which I get, right? Government seems to be the same way, not completely, but the focus is definitely on programs. On the nonprofit side, I mean, on the government side, probably for me would just take a little research on who is doing capital. There's not a ton of it. Meg, if you want to maybe just put your email in the chat, we can keep rolling around in that a little bit. But you're absolutely right. It's generally program based.
And Meg, just in case you don't get a chance to get your information to Doug's information was posted in the chat earlier.
there
So
she is.
definitely feel free to reach
Thanks,
out.
Meg.
And Center for Nonprofits is a great resource.
All right, so on behalf of our great panelists, Doug, Max, and our own Chris, thank you. Again, you can check out our website, www.njbia.org, to look at all the ways we support nonprofits, manufacturers, and all job creators in New Jersey. And all of you are fully aware of the great work that Chris and our whole government affairs team does every single day, some of which are on this call today. So thank you for everything you do. A recording will be go out. Thank you, and we hope to see you again soon at another NJBIA event. Have a great day.